Adrian Cole had always believed that love was simple. Two hearts finding comfort in each other, building dreams too fragile to question. At 24, with his charm and easy smile, he thought he had finally found his forever in the woman who held his hand through every moment of silence and storm. Their laughter echoed in late-night drives, their promises whispered beneath the weight of the stars. But behind her tender smiles lay a truth unspoken, a secret that twisted in shadows, waiting for the right moment to break free. What Adrian didn't know was that the love of his life was fighting a battle of identity, torn between the warmth of what they shared and the undeniable truth of who she really was. And when the moment came for her to speak, a single confession would shatter his world, leaving him caught between heartbreak and the haunting question of what love truly means when identity steps into the light. Adrian Cole had always been the kind of man who drew attention without trying. At 24, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made people turn their heads, not just because of his looks, but because of the warmth he exuded. He had an easy smile, the kind that softened even the most guarded hearts, and a way of listening that made others feel like their words mattered. It was this combination of charm and sincerity that first drew his girlfriend to him, a woman who, for a while, made him believe he had discovered the kind of love that poets wrote about and dreamers longed for. For Adrian, the beginning of their story wasn't just a chapter of romance. It felt like the very foundation of a life he had been searching for without realizing it. The first time they met, Adrian hadn't expected her to stay in his mind the way she did. She wasn't just beautiful. She was captivating in ways that went beyond appearance. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous, the half-second pause she gave before speaking as if weighing her words carefully, the light in her eyes when she laughed. These were details that embedded themselves in Adrian's memory like ink pressed into paper. From the very beginning, he felt as if the universe had brought her into his life at just the right moment, as though all the quiet nights of loneliness and searching had led him to her. In the early days, their love was the kind of whirlwind that felt unstoppable. Long walks through the city at dusk became their ritual, her hand slipping into his as though it had belonged there all along. They shared secrets over cups of coffee at hidden cafes, building a language of glances and unspoken understandings that belonged to no one but them. Adrian often found himself marveling at how natural it all felt, how seamlessly she had become part of his world. When she smiled at him, he didn't just feel happiness. He felt an almost terrifying sense of certainty, the conviction that this was the person he was meant to be with. But beneath the bliss, there were moments, small, fleeting fragments, that Adrian didn't fully understand. A sudden heaviness in her gaze when he spoke of the future, a silence that lingered too long after certain words, a distance in her touch that sometimes felt deliberate. They were moments that Adrian brushed aside, convincing himself that all relationships had their shadows, that love wasn't about perfection, but about weathering the little storms together. He told himself she loved him, and he believed it, because the way she leaned against his shoulder on long train rides or whispered his name in the quiet of the night felt too real to question. As weeks became months, Adrian found himself building more than memories with her. He built dreams. He imagined an apartment where their laughter filled the walls, dinners cooked side by side, maybe even a family years down the road. He pictured holidays spent together, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the world go by. These visions weren't just fleeting fantasies. They were blueprints etched into his heart, plans that gave meaning to every sacrifice he was willing to make. He loved her with a kind of intensity that made the rest of the world blur, as though every other detail in his life had been leading him here. To this love, to this woman, and yet, even in his certainty, Adrian felt a quiet restlessness he couldn't name. He could sense there was a part of her he hadn't reached, a piece of herself she kept locked away no matter how close they became. Sometimes when he caught her staring into the distance with that look of conflicted thought, he wanted to ask her what shadows followed her. But he never did. He feared that asking might break the delicate balance they had, that if he pressed too hard, the fragile beauty of what they shared might shatter. So instead, he held her tighter, kissed her forehead, and told himself that love would be enough to erase whatever doubts lingered in her silence. For Adrian, loving her wasn't just about the present moment. It was about the promise of forever. He had fallen not just for her smile or her laugh, but for the idea of building a life where those things would always be his. Every time she whispered, "I love you," it stitched itself into his soul, binding him to her in ways he couldn't have untangled even if he tried. He trusted those words, clung to them, and built his future upon them. To Adrian, she wasn't just his girlfriend, She was his safe place, his anchor, his dream made real. But in the quiet hours of night, when the world fell silent and only the sound of her breathing filled the room, Adrian sometimes wondered if he truly knew every part of her heart. He didn't recognize it then, but her love carried a weight, a conflict buried deep within her that no amount of his affection could soothe. Still, he told himself that love was stronger than whatever battles she fought inside, that as long as they held on to each other, there was nothing they couldn't face. For Adrian Cole, in those moments, the world was simple. He was in love, and she was the center of it. Adrian Cole's world was painted in the soft colors of love. But like all paintings, there were shadows that gave depth and mystery to the picture. His relationship with her was no exception. At first, everything seemed flawless, as though the universe had finally aligned to reward him for years of searching for something genuine. They laughed together until their sides ached, exchanged stolen glances that spoke louder than words, and shared tender moments that made even the most ordinary days feel extraordinary. Yet as time moved on, Adrian began to notice cracks forming in the foundation of what he thought was unshakable. It started subtly, moments so fleeting he almost missed them. She would look away when he spoke about moving in together, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing invisible shapes on the table, while her mind wandered elsewhere. When he spoke of marriage, of building a future, her smile never quite reached her eyes. Sometimes she pulled back from his embrace a little too quickly, as though contact had grown heavy, too demanding. Adrian convinced himself these were just signs of stress, perhaps the weight of adulthood pressing down on her spirit. He reassured himself that all relationships had phases, moments of doubt, moments where silence replaced words. But beneath his attempts at denial, a quiet unease began to stir. He became more observant, searching for reasons behind her distance. There were times when she seemed fully present, gazing into his eyes with such warmth that he wondered if he had imagined the tension. Then, without warning, she would retreat again, slipping into a shell of thoughtfulness that no gentle touch or loving word could penetrate. Adrian tried to ask her about it once, but her response was vague, a half-smile and a whispered, "I'm just tired." He wanted to believe her, to accept her words as truth, yet something about the way her voice wavered told him there was more. The nights were the hardest. In the dim light of their quiet moments, when Adrian wanted nothing more than to hold her close and feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, he noticed how her body sometimes stiffened before relaxing into him. He told himself she was merely distracted, caught up in her thoughts, but deep down he feared her distance carried a meaning he wasn't ready to face. Her silences grew longer, her laughter rarer, and though her "I love yous" still came, they began to sound rehearsed, as if the words had become obligations rather than confessions. Adrian's heart battled with itself, torn between trust and suspicion. He loved her too deeply to accept the idea that something was slipping away, yet he couldn't ignore the subtle shifts that painted his days with uncertainty. He began to question himself. Was he doing something wrong? Had he failed to give her what she needed? Or was there something else, something unspoken, resting between them like a secret too heavy for her to share? The suspense of not knowing gnawed at him, keeping him awake long into the night. He replayed their conversations in his head, searching for clues hidden in her words, in her pauses, in the way she sometimes seemed far away even when she was right beside him. It was like chasing shadows. Each time he thought he had found the answer, it slipped through his fingers, leaving him with nothing but more questions. Still, Adrian held on to hope. Love, he believed, was about patience, about waiting for the person you cared for to open up when they were ready. He told himself that whatever burden she carried, whatever storm brewed within her, he would be there to weather it with her. But beneath his hope was an unspoken fear, a fear that the distance he felt was not temporary, but the beginning of a truth that could unravel everything he had built in his heart. Adrian tried to silence the storm inside him by holding tighter to the moments that still felt real. He cherished every laugh they shared, every fleeting kiss that reminded him of how it used to be. Yet, no matter how hard he clung to those fragments, the distance between them continued to grow, a quiet ache settling in the spaces where intimacy once thrived. It was in her eyes that he noticed it most. Those beautiful eyes that once lit up when they met his now carried a weight he couldn't understand. Sometimes, when she thought he wasn't watching, he caught glimpses of sorrow, of conflict, as though she was fighting a battle deep within herself. He wanted to ask her, to demand the truth that hung in the air like a fragile thread ready to snap, but something always stopped him. Maybe it was fear of the answer. Maybe it was hope that things would return to normal if he just gave it time. Instead of confronting the silence, he drowned himself in gestures of love. Flowers at her doorstep, handwritten notes slipped into her bag, late-night calls where he tried to make her laugh. She appreciated them, but her responses often felt hollow, her gratitude laced with guilt he couldn't yet recognize. There were moments when the mask almost slipped. One evening, while they sat together on the balcony, the city lights flickering below, Adrian spoke about a trip they could take together, somewhere far from the noise, just the two of them. For a moment her face lit up, her smile genuine and bright, but as he continued painting pictures of their future, her expression shifted. The sparkle faded from her eyes, replaced by a distant look, as if his words were reaching a part of her she couldn't embrace. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder, and whispered softly, "You deserve so much." Adrian. The words stayed with him long after, echoing in his mind like a riddle he couldn't solve. It wasn't just the silence or the distance, it was the way she seemed torn in two, caught between wanting to be present and needing to retreat. Sometimes she would hold him with a tenderness that made him believe he was her entire world, only to withdraw into a quiet stillness that made him question if he knew her at all. Adrian's chest tightened each time he felt her slipping away, but he told himself it was just stress. That life had a way of pulling people in different directions, and love was about pulling them back together. The truth, however, loomed like a storm cloud he couldn't see but could feel. It was there in the unspoken pauses, in the way her voice faltered when he spoke of forever, in the tension that lingered even during their happiest moments. Adrian didn't know what it was, but he knew something was coming, something that would either break them apart or bind them closer than ever. He had no idea how close he was to the revelation that would change everything he thought he knew about love, identity, and the woman he couldn't imagine living without. The night it happened began like any other, quiet and unassuming, the kind of night Adrian believed would pass without consequence. They sat together in her apartment, the soft hum of the city drifting through the window, their conversation light but distracted. Adrian could sense the unease in her, the way her hands fidgeted, the way her gaze avoided his for longer than usual. He knew her well enough to recognize when something weighed heavily on her mind, and tonight that weight was undeniable. She had been carrying it for weeks, maybe longer, and though he didn't know what it was, Adrian felt it pressing against the fragile shell of their relationship, like a secret desperate to be freed. He tried to ease the tension with warmth, his arm draped around her as he spoke about simple things, the new restaurant they should try, the song that reminded him of her, the plans he wanted them to make together. But instead of smiling, she seemed to shrink deeper into herself, her shoulders tense, her breaths uneven. Finally, she pulled away and sat facing him, her eyes glistening with a vulnerability he had rarely seen. Adrian's heart quickened, something in the air shifted, a heaviness settling between them that words could no longer mask. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. At first the words were slow, uncertain, as though she was building the courage with every syllable. She told him she had been hiding something, not because she wanted to deceive him, but because she had been terrified of what it would mean for them. Adrian felt his chest tighten, his mind spinning with possibilities. Was she sick? Was there someone else? Was she leaving him? He tried to steady his breathing as he reached for her hand, silently urging her to continue. Then came the truth, simple yet earth-shattering. She told him she was a lesbian. The words hung in the room, sharp and undeniable, echoing louder in his mind than her trembling voice had delivered them. For a moment Adrian couldn't process it. His heart stopped, his thoughts scattered. Every memory they had built together, every kiss, every promise, every whispered "I love you" seemed to blur under the weight of that confession. He stared at her, searching her eyes for something, clarity, remorse, anything that could help him make sense of what he had just heard. But what he saw instead was a mixture of relief and fear, as though she had finally unburdened herself of a truth too heavy to keep hidden, yet terrified of the pain it might bring him. Adrian's heart broke in silence. 1,000 emotions crashed into him at once: love, confusion, betrayal, sorrow. The woman he had built his future around was standing before him, revealing a truth that unraveled the very foundation of their relationship. The room felt colder, the air heavier, and though she was only a few feet away, Adrian had never felt more distant from her. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, to fight for the love he believed in, but his voice betrayed him, caught somewhere between disbelief and heartbreak. All he could do was sit there, his mind spiraling as the truth settled around him like shards of glass, cutting through every dream he had held so tightly. Adrian sat in silence long after her words fell into the air, his heart pounding like a drum against his ribs. The revelation echoed inside him, and no matter how many times he replayed it, it never softened. She was a lesbian. It wasn't a slip of the tongue, nor a moment of confusion. It was her truth, one she had buried for years, and now it stood between them like an unmovable wall. Adrian's world, which only hours ago had felt steady and sure, now trembled beneath his feet. The future he had imagined, marriage, children, growing old together, suddenly dissolved into nothing more than a fragile illusion. She reached for his hand, her eyes pleading, not for forgiveness but for understanding. Her touch was gentle, but Adrian felt it differently now, as if the warmth in her fingers carried an entirely new meaning. She explained, her voice shaking, that she had loved him in her own way, that he had been her safe place when she was still trying to figure out who she was. Every smile, every kiss, every memory. They weren't lies, but they weren't the whole truth either. She had been hiding, not from him, but from herself. Adrian could hear the weight of guilt in every word, and though he wanted to hold on to his anger, he couldn't deny the vulnerability in her confession. His chest ached with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Did she ever truly love him? Was their relationship just a mask, a chapter she used to shield herself from the reality she feared? Every insecurity clawed at him, but beneath it all there was something deeper, an aching sorrow that no amount of answers could mend. He wasn't just losing the woman he loved, he was losing the life he thought they were building. It was as if someone had torn out the final pages of a story he had been writing with all his heart. Adrian's voice finally broke through the silence, raw and unsteady. He asked why she hadn't told him sooner, why she had let him fall so deeply into a love that was destined to collapse. Tears welled in her eyes as she admitted she had been afraid of losing him, afraid of confronting herself, afraid of the world's judgment. She had wanted to be honest, but every time she tried, the words felt too heavy, too final. Tonight, though, she could no longer carry the weight. Tonight, she chose truth over comfort, no matter how much it hurt them both. The room grew heavy with emotions neither of them could fully name. Adrian felt betrayed, yet he also felt her pain as though it were his own. There was no villain here, no easy blame to cast, only two people caught in the crossfire of love and identity, two hearts that wanted to hold on to each other, but were being torn apart by a truth stronger than their bond. For Adrian, the hardest part wasn't anger or confusion. It was the hollow space inside him where love still lived, colliding painfully with the knowledge that it could never be enough. Adrian sat in the aftermath of her confession, his mind a battlefield of love, loss, and unanswered questions. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with everything they had been and everything they could never be again. He looked at her, the woman who had once been his entire world, and saw someone both familiar and distant. She was the same person he had fallen for, yet now she stood before him with a truth that separated them in ways no argument or distance ever could. Her tears shimmered in the dim light, and for a fleeting moment Adrian wanted to reach out, to wipe them away, to pretend none of this had happened. But his hand remained frozen at his side, weighed down by the ache of reality. She whispered his name, her voice breaking as she said she never meant to hurt him, that she would always care for him. But she could not deny who she was anymore. Those words carved deeper than any blade could, because they were honest, final, and impossible to fight against. Adrian's heart trembled between anger and compassion. He wanted to shout, to ask her why she let him dream of forever when she knew the truth all along. But beneath the pain, he saw her fear, her struggle, her courage in finally speaking what had been buried for so long. And in that moment, his anger softened, replaced by an ache that ran deeper than rage ever could. He realized this wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the unraveling of two lives built around different truths. The weight of it crushed him, yet he couldn't bring himself to hate her. How could he, when he knew the strength it had taken for her to finally reveal who she really was? He loved her still, painfully so. But he also understood that love was not enough to rewrite identity. His dreams of forever dissolved into silence, and all that remained was the quiet devastation of letting go. As she reached for him one last time, her touch trembling with sorrow, Adrian closed his eyes, holding on to the memory of what they once were. Love had brought them together, but truth had torn them apart, leaving Adrian standing on the fragile line between heartbreak and acceptance, a man forever changed by the moment when love met identity.